All right, we are on part two. But you know what I just thought of? Someday I'm going to look back at these and be like, oh my gosh, I did that while I was pregnant. And I haven't seen y'all in a while. So if you want to see, look at this bump. Can you see it? I don't even know if you can see it. Look how big I am. Crazy. I know. I've grown. I've grown. Anyway, maybe y'all don't care. I'll get right to it. Okay, so part two, dialectical tensions. Let's chat about them. But I just know someday I'm going to be like, I was pregnant when I was recording these. Or I'll have to share them with students because I don't want to re-record, and they're going to be like, you look different. Hopefully I will, right? Hopefully I'll be skinnier. And I'll be like, I was pregnant. Okay. Let's talk about dialectical tensions or dialectical tension, relational dialectic theory. So these contend that relationships are constantly changing and revolve around how partners handle tensions, which are conflicts between two significant yet opposing needs or desires. So what I want you to keep in mind about these are two things. Number one, they are present in every relationship. Okay? So I know this I know this chapter is over romantic relationships, but this can apply to friendships and family members as well. Okay? They are present in every relationship. So even if as we're going through these, you're like, I don't need much of that. Yeah, you do on some level. Okay? Number two, to keep in mind about these before I go over them, is that they're not going anywhere. In the next slide, we're going to talk about how we manage these tensions, but the important thing for you to note is that these tensions aren't going anywhere. So we have to figure something out on how to manage them. Okay? All right. These are really interesting. I love talking about these because they're the kind of thing where you can see, how do I explain it? Like I've seen them in my relationships in the past and even in the present sometimes, and I'll give you an example of that, where you can feel it, but you didn't know that that was a name. And then now that I have the name for them, it's like, oh, that's, my need for this and this. So the reason they're called tensions and the reason they're framed as verses is because they're working in opposition of each other. Okay. They're working in opposition of each other. Okay. So let's get into them. Autonomy versus connection. Autonomy, we want to be autonomous. We want to be our own person. But at the same time, we want that connection. We want companionship, right? So, this can be, and a lot of my students feel this, and I've felt this before. This can be kind of that feeling that you have where you're like, I want to be in a relationship, but then I don't want to have to answer to somebody, but I want, kind of that struggle where you're like, yeah, but I do want that companionship. I want that person that actually cares what I ate for dinner or something. I don't know. But also I want to be my own person. I want to be able to do my own thing, whatever. Okay. So again, I will remind you several times, probably more than you might want. I don't want to call it a problem. The issue is they are in opposition. So we want both on some level. Okay. Predictability versus novelty. We like predictability to some extent, right? But at the same time, we want novelty or newness or spontaneity. Okay. This is one, I told you I would give you an example. This is one that I have felt in relationships all the time, right? So, and I still kind of feel it in my marriage, and that's not something that it's not something to be embarrassed of, or it has nothing to do with my marriage. I think we go through this a lot as people. So, let me just give you an example. This isn't from my marriage, but I'll give you an example of when I was with my ex where I felt this. And because it works and it was very present and I knew it. So when we were at a certain point we dated for like 4 years or 3 years. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore. But when we were at a certain point in our relationship, I remember one semester, this was during college, we, like every Friday night, we would go out to eat and, rent a movie on Redbox or, that was when like Netflix was just up and coming. So, that was nice. Like I liked knowing, because I was doing my student teaching at this time. So I went from, taking like 2 to 3 classes a day to, from like 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. being in the classroom and doing the full-time gig. So I liked that by Friday afternoons, I was exhausted. So I literally looked forward to the fact that Friday evening, it wasn't going to be, I told you I was in a sorority, he was in a fraternity. It wasn't going to be like, oh, they're having people over at the house. Like, do you want to go or whatever? I liked that. So that's predictability, right? But at the same time, sometimes I was like, oh, it's getting old. Like, okay, what are we doing? Okay, so you're saying we're just going out to eat and then we're gonna chill, So it can be that I hate to say bratty, but that's how I experience it. Almost like that bratty kid where I want both, but neither. But it's like, well, then let's do something different. No, but I want to be able to but I want to relax. Okay, then what do you want? You know what I mean? Like, again, this is one that I feel the most out of the 3. I experience this a lot because it can be tough because yes, I do find comfort in, the routine and us, when we could leave the house, Taylor and I we're really good at novelty. Actually, he's good at the novelty part. He's very spontaneous and stuff like that. So we don't have a ton of routine, so I don't get sick of it. But so this one, again, I'm spending too much time on this, but it's because I relate to it. So anyway, you want that predictability. It can be nice knowing that you're gonna do something or not do something, but then it gets old, right? And then we want something new or something spontaneous. Openness versus closeness. We want to be open with someone. We want to self-disclose. We want to have that person that we can open up to. But at the same time, we want information that's just ours. We want information that, we don't want them maybe to know everything about us. And that's not in a shady way, but, it's, we don't want to have to tell them everything. We're still our own person. Okay. So maybe you relate to some of these. Maybe you, as I'm going through this and as you're listening and hopefully taking notes, you're thinking about relationships that you have where you're like, oh crap, that's okay. I'm experiencing that, or I have in the past. That's what that was. So let's go over how we manage them. Okay. So we engage in these. The first thing I want to say before we delve in is that none of these are inherently good or bad, but rather the effectiveness depends on the individual's goals for the relationship. So it's about what works for you. None of these are inherently good or bad. We just do what works for us, okay? So if you see me looking down, I'm looking at my notes because I always get these confused, and I want to make sure that I tell y'all the right stuff, okay? So denial is where you respond only to one side of the tension and ignore the other, okay? You respond to only one side of the tension and ignore the other, okay? So an example of that your book gives is maybe spending weekends together with autonomy versus connection. Maybe you spend weekends together and you completely ignore your need for connection, but then during the week you favor autonomy and you barely contact or see each other. Okay? So think about in that moment, you're denying one of them. Segmentation, partners assign each need to certain issues, activities, or times. Partners assign each need to certain issues, activities, or times. Okay, so for example, let's use issues with openness versus closeness. Maybe you talk to your romantic partner about everything except for an issue with your parents. Maybe you don't get along with your parents very well. So that's just an issue or a topic that you just don't, that's where you get your closeness. You don't talk about it with your partner. Maybe you reserve that so you talk about it with your sibling, right? Maybe when you talk about it with your partner, it ends up in a fight because they don't get it. You've grown up with your parents. You know how they are. You know how they react to stuff. And they're like, no, it's fine. And you're like, never mind. I'll talk about it with my sibling who gets what I'm saying. Okay. Balance is where you negotiate a compromise where each dialectical need is met to an extent, but neither is fully satisfied. Okay, so kind of how it sounds, right? A balance of the two. So each is met to an extent, but neither is fully satisfied. So maybe it, like, yeah, I'd like more autonomy, but at least I'm getting both, right? Recalibration is basically reframing. You redefine the contradicting needs as not actually in opposition. So this one's a little bit different. But as y'all probably know, the way that we view things can be really, really significant and can make all the difference in how we deal with it. So this isn't being in denial. It's not, it's not just trying to, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Trick yourself. It's just reframing. You just choose to look at it as they're not actually in opposition. That way it helps you deal with them. Okay. Reaffirmation is embracing the dialectical tensions as a normal part of life. So you just accept they're going to be in opposition. I'm going to want both to a certain extent, and it all works out. Okay. So, the book, I want to make sure the book clarifies the difference between this and reframing, and I think it's helpful. Reframing means that you're eliminating the tension by not seeing it in opposition. So you're seeing it as, oh, they're not actually in opposition. But reaffirmation, you're affirming, look at what it says. You're affirming that they're in opposition, but you're just accepting it as normal. You're just like, okay, that and that they're in opposition, and that's that. Okay. So again, none of these are inherently good or bad. It just is what works for you and what the goal is for that relationship. Okay. We will continue this chapter in the next part.